And now we go to our last panel, and then we have a fire chat to close the day. Camilla de Veale is our next moderator, and she will talk about how we can build, but also about how we can nurture a sustainable ecosystem. And of course, we have inspiring guests waiting. Grégoire Martinez, Head of Strategic Projects from Station F, is with us. Ricardo Marvão, co-founder of Beta I, and Kat Borlongan, Chief Impact Officer of Content Square. And she was also the former director of La French Tech. Let's talk with them about a sustainable ecosystem.
Well, hello, what dramatic music that is. Yes, so my name is Camilla, and I'm Policy Director at Coadec, the Coalition for a Digital Economy, and we represent the policy voice of startups and scale-ups in the UK. We describe ourselves as founded by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs. We're a free resource for startups. If you operate in the UK, come say hi. But I thought I would start if I just let the panelists give a quick introduction of themselves and the elevator pitch. So Kat, how about you take it away?
Oh, okay. So hello, my name is Kat Borlongan, and I have worked at the intersection of tech and social good for quite a long time. First as a nonprofit director at a nonprofit called Reporters Without Borders in the United Nations. In government, I used to lead the what we call La French Tech, so under the Macron administration, which is a special team that bolsters the French tech ecosystem, as an entrepreneur, and now as a Chief Impact Officer at Content Square, which is a UX analytics company based in France.
Thanks, Ricardo.
Hi, my name is Ricardo Marvão. I'm one of the co-founders of Beta I. We are one of the main organizations in Portugal that developed the startup ecosystem, mainly in Lisbon. And today we focus a lot on collaborative innovation between big corporates and startups.
And Grégoire.
Hi everyone, I'm Grégoire, so managing the team working on all Station F strategic projects. So Station F, basically, it's the world's largest startup campus based in Paris. We welcome more than 1,000 early stage startups at any given time to provide them access to the best resources possible and all the resources they need to grow their businesses.
Well, fantastic. As you can see, fantastic panel. So one of the reasons I was really thrilled to be here is because I think that we all represent very different builds and stages of our ecosystems. And so with that in mind, I thought maybe I could turn to Ricardo first and talk about how Lisbon has such a fantastic, rapidly developing startup ecosystem. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about how they've done that, some of the thinking behind what they've done and the tactics that they've used, and maybe if you have any reflection on what you think is the most important element to building a startup ecosystem, what's the foundation rock that it's got to be built on?
Okay. So I guess you remember 2010, Portugal was bankrupt. So if it's already difficult to create an ecosystem, try doing it in a bankrupt country. Very hard. And so what we did was basically we developed this strategy to understand a bit like what Robin was talking about, the cooking recipe of the unicorns. We did a cooking recipe for the ecosystem. And we went abroad and we looked at what are the other ecosystems that are doing cool stuff that we could bring some ingredients to our own recipe. And then we brought a lot of people to Portugal from all over the world. And that gave us the basis for our recipe. And then we started creating, knowing that this is a long-term vision, it takes 10 years to create an ecosystem. And the other thing that we did was, to create an ecosystem, you have to always be prepared to understand, okay, what's missing in the ecosystem, so that you start preparing for the next phase. Because just like a startup that grows to a scale-up, a unicorn, and then basically the founders come back to the ecosystem and give back, just like Station F is also a give back to the ecosystem, you have to do the same with the ecosystem, so that the ecosystem also gives back and goes around. And so it took about 10 years. Today, you look at Lisbon and you see like amazing success story. But until 2015, I would say, it was really hard because there was no money, and we had to take the founders to London or New York, and bit by bit they started getting funded. But there you have it. I mean, this was how we did it.
And what do you think was the sort of critical turning point? Could you see there was one, or did you just sort of realize one day, oh my goodness, like this is a really strong ecosystem?
I think in 2015 we had quite a number of startups that had good rounds, all in about 6 months. And then we also had like 3 startups that got into YC, and that made them talk about Portugal, what's happening in Lisbon. They came to Portugal, people started talking, and then Seed Camp was already there since 2012, doing mini seed camps, and they did 5 years in a row. And I guess this propelled to the next phase. That was a good turning point.
And I wonder if I could widen it out to the rest of the panel now. You know, there will be people in the audience who will be going back and looking at their own ecosystems and sort of maybe wanting to judge them a bit and think, you know, what should I be asking policymakers to help with, or what should I be wanting to nurture or develop? So what does the rest of the panel think are the sort of critical parts of an ecosystem that we need to look at especially and measure?
You know, I guess I'm coming at this from, you know, I almost kind of want to talk about station. So you know, sort of disclaimer, my office was at Station F for 4 years, and we were massive supporters. So I feel like, you know, Greg can pitch whatever I'm doing, and I can kind of pitch whatever Greg's doing. And that's also the sign of a really healthy ecosystem, by the way. So, you know, and I can talk about the French case, I guess. French case is a little different in the sense that, you know, we had a lot going for us very early on. We had these brilliant founders, right? An economy that was pretty strong. But the startup ecosystem wasn't taking off, and we took off quite late, actually. If you compare France to Germany, to the UK, even to Holland, we're super late, right? Like the French tech ecosystem only really started taking off maybe around like 2013, 14. In 2000, just to give you an idea, in 2018, which is when I was appointed as director of the French Tech, we only had 3 unicorns against, you know, almost 30 today, right? Just to give you an idea. And I think, like, you know, one of the things that make a healthy ecosystem, if you look at the more mature tech ecosystem, something you'll see, and Ricardo mentioned this before, is the ability to give back. You have exits that afterwards can generate, you know, more capital that goes back into the ecosystem through angels, through investors. You have more talent that also goes back into the ecosystem. More importantly, you have very seasoned and battle-tested talent that's able to take a startup from 5 to 50 to 500 to 5,000. And you just have a lot of, like, expertise and knowledge, right? And that just sort of cycles back. And what we call an ecosystem is exactly this. Now, France didn't have that. And I think maybe one of the differences in terms of the approach of the French is we decided to cheat, which is true. And we decided to cheat as much as possible. And so if you look at the entire kind of like French tech strategy, the best way to understand it is exactly like the government, you know, trying to cheat. So what did we do? We tried to get as much talent as possible, and so we're like, where are we gonna find them? We're like, they're all going to London, they're all going to the US. You know what's horrible right now? Immigration. Let's be the best country when it comes to immigration. So I was able to create something that's called the French Tech Visa, which is still the most open tech employee visa in the world today, which is able to bring in a lot of different people. Capital, we also cheated. Essentially, you know, BPI France, which is the French public bank, you know, took the spot of a lot of early stage investors that were missing early on in the ecosystem and came in mostly as co-investors. We never lead, by the way, so the state doesn't, I just have to stop saying we, sorry, state doesn't lead rounds, but we do try to do it to attract more investment. When the ecosystem started maturing into more, you know, growth stage, you know, that was in 2019, we released what we call the TB fund, which is over 5 billion, half of which was used to fund to fund VCs, actually, where we came in as an LP to allow VCs that focus on early stage to move on to growth and to strengthen homegrown VCs. Where else did we cheat? So many things. And then we spoke to a lot of the founders that had left, because I said we had these people before, right? I mean, they wanted to found Datadog and Snowflake and Eventbrite. So we knew we had that talent, but they all left. And one of the reasons why they left is that, and I think this is the foundation of any healthy ecosystem, there's just no more trust. They just did not trust the French government. They thought we were like a bunch of, sort of bureaucrats who just hated innovation and wanted to see them suffer. And so there was also a significant amount of time that was spent on one-on-one conversations with a lot of people that were pre-identified, rebuilding that trust. And I think that's, to a certain extent how the French ecosystem got to sort of leapfrogging that development curve in a short period of time.
Fantastic for the roadmap. I'm sure that's not cheating. I think it's hacking growth, or whatever we might call it. But Grégoire, is there anything that you'd like to add to how someone can judge the health of their ecosystem, and how maybe the audience should be? What should they look out for?
Yeah, I think Kat already said a lot about the French ecosystem and the dramatic change and shift we had for the past years. I think you mentioned having more and more talent and talents that were involved in the ecosystem before. It's something we see more and more at Station F. We have this phenomenon of mafia. Basically, you had the most famous one was in the US, the PayPal mafia, basically with David Marcus and all the other people. And in France, we start to see people living let's say not old startups, but like BlaBlaCar, which is one of the first startups we had in France, almost 15 years ago. We have people that are leaving these companies to create their own startups, and they are super successful, raising funds, etc. And I think it's something key. You mentioned also attracting talents from abroad, and I think the French government has done a lot around French visa, and now to make it easier and smoother for foreign talents to join French startups. Yeah, I think it's now way better than a few years ago, and the French ecosystem is super promising for the next few months and years in terms of startups and scale-ups. Also, perhaps we just passed the 25 unicorns. It was beginning of this year, and 1 year ago we were at 12. So it means that basically it doubles over the last year. So yeah, I think it's super promising.
Sorry, I just want to add something, because I can't tell you how much I love Station F, and the thing that I love the most about Station F isn't so much the Station F that you see today, which is already full of thousands of startups. When I first saw Station F, I walked in with a construction helmet and boots, and we were walking into this construction site essentially, which is disproportionately large, right? This is in 2017. I was like, Roxanne, how are you going to fill people here? Do we even have enough startups to fill this place? Yeah. And Roxanne and her team, they were just every week, they would walk people inside this construction site and pitch them the dream of what the ecosystem could become. So yes, there are a lot of technical aspects that come into it, but I think first and foremost, it's really about an ecosystem that knows how to dream together. Yeah.
There is a lot of pedagogy to do, basically, to make the ecosystem more sustainable and more involved in giving back.
We actually, to talk about Lisbon, we actually cheated on to go.
I feel like this is going to be a thing.
We cheated on this amazing. Who has been to Lisbon? How amazing is that city? It is amazing. And you heard today at Tech.eu Summit, crypto guys all flocking to Lisbon. There was the COO of Pitch saying, "Oh, we're going to do our company retreat in Portugal." So a lot of people were talking about Portugal today. And so Lisbon is really attractive as a city. After COVID, my God, the number of people going to an amazing place because they can work remotely, it's really a nice city to be in. In terms of quality of life, it's amazing. And so we use the city a lot.
Well, since you used the C word, I wonder whether we could pivot into that theme. Given that lots of startups experimented with being almost fully remote during COVID, I wondered whether you all had any reflections, but particularly Grégoire, on how whether physical proximity matters, and how did Station F adapt during COVID?
Yeah, it's basically at the heart of Station F because we are like a 34,000 square meter building with 1,000 startups, and the goal is to ensure that people can network, discuss, exchange best practices, find solutions to their pain points. And so back in March 2 years ago, we had to close Station F for the first time. It's usually open 24/7. And so we had this huge challenge to move all the community and all our resources to online, because we were all basically at home. And so we've seen a huge increase, especially we have a huge Slack with everyone at Station F, and when I say everyone, it's usually like, it's us, the Station F staff, it's all the entrepreneurs, it's all the public administrations, La French Tech, it's even people from who are managing the restaurant who is at Station F, so really everyone. And so we moved everything online, basically ensuring that people can ask all their questions, find answers to their challenges online directly from home. And since that, we've also added a lot of resources online. We have a dedicated intranet, basically, that we've developed in-house to feature all the resources available to startups. And so we've moved a lot of things online, all our events, of course, workshops online. But the thing is that what we've seen, at the beginning, it was working very well because it was new for people to be at home, and they were really willing to exchange with people because they were alone at home. And more now, people want to go back to offices, see people again. I think we're all glad to be there in person today. And yes, so it's important to have a mix between, I think, online and in person, because if you only do online, it's tough to maintain a great relation for a long time, I think.
I mean, I have a take on that, and I think, this question, I don't think there's one single answer, right? But one thing that really affects it is demographics. And overall, the founders at Station F are quite young. I'd say closer to late 20s.
The average age is 31.
Is 31.
Yeah.
And I think when you decide where you're going to live, it's totally different if you are single and moving around the world, and if you have children. So something that I've seen as well is so if anyone here is thinking about really investing in their ecosystem, if I learned one thing when I was in government, if you really care about building an international ecosystem, you have to invest a lot in this one thing, which is international schools. Yeah. Because that is something that can be a massive deal breaker. So when I was in my previous role, something that we would do is try to support some of our growth stage companies who are bringing in top level execs and having them join the company and move in. And sometimes the deal breakers would be the fact that the international schools were full and they couldn't find a spot for their kids. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure this is something you identify with as well.
Yeah. So. I'm going to take on
you
no,
go for it.
So I had a chat a few weeks ago with the ambassador of France in Portugal, and he was telling me, well, 5 years ago we had 6,000 people registered, 6,000 French people registered at the embassy. Today, 50,000. So the French are also coming to Portugal. But I totally agree with you. We have 2 new French schools that were built in the last 2-3 years. Because of exactly this. You need the international schools there. Yeah.
And I think what Kat said is super important because you have to think, when you want to attract talents from abroad, you have to think to the visa and all the administrative stuff, and then you have to think about the experience of people when they are landing in your country. Right. And so they want to open a bank account, they want to find a place to live, they want to be able to have a school for their child, and it's still something where I think a lot of ecosystems have work to do to improve that part of the experience.
Yeah, so just more specifically, my experience was, and based on the statistics that we were looking at, is it's very different if they have children under 7 or above 7. Under 7, they're more likely to kind of wing it and be happy to have their kids in this completely, international environment. And usually over 7, they want them already in an environment where they can speak their own language. So it changes quite a bit.
And actually, since you brought up your role in government, I wondered, because you've changed roles recently, now that sort of building ecosystems is no longer the sort of day job, and you're doing so much other things. How do you sort of see the role now? Do you see it differently as an outsider, or are you still checking up and going, that's good, that's not?
I used to in my previous role, I used to think of myself as someone who would look after the ecosystem and who would take care of it. But no matter how startup savvy you are, how many people you know, when you're in government, you are not the ecosystem. You are still just a catalyst, right? And now it's a little different because, working inside Content Square, which is one of the fastest growing companies in France, 1,800 people now, still doubling in size every year, still triple-digit growth. It's different kind of experiencing it from this standpoint. And I think, and on top of that, there's a question of timing as well. So, I was the director of the French Tech from 2018 until September of last year. And a lot of things changed in that last year, actually. And, I really like the fact that you talked about sustainable ecosystems more specifically. Because I think that's not necessarily a topic that people think about when they're building ecosystems in the beginning, right? Yeah. They're just going for numbers, they're going for mass, they're going for, they care about things like, growth, number of unicorns, and things like that. And France got to a point we're like, wait a minute, what are we building all of this for, right? Like, from a values perspective, even for, I'd say this is a European question, right? Do we really want to be just another Silicon Valley? What makes us different? And so I think, working not just in a startup, but in, a startup that's been doing extraordinarily well and that's quite large, and now we're wondering, like, okay, what's next for us? So, I'm the Chief Impact Officer, and my job in one sentence is to transform a very successfully and aggressively revenue-driven company into a mission-driven company in under 3 years in terms of product, in terms of practices, in terms of culture, in terms of giving. And I think, like, when you're actually not looking at things from a macro perspective, the way I was in government, and you're looking at things more from a micro perspective, these are things that you start to think about. Like, you start to think a little bit more about things like diversity and inclusion. What's your sustainability going to be like? How are we going to navigate, the next sort of shift of standards when it comes to privacy and digital trust?
So on that note, since I know I'm being asked to wrap up, imagining that we're all going to come back in 2025 and meet again, what would you hope that you could tell me about your ecosystem? What have you built? What are you most excited about?
Well, I hope it'll be European. I mean, I feel like I've been singing the same song about France for 4 years, and at some point, like, Ricardo and I have been on a bunch of panels together, and we like to, kind of like poke fun each other and compare and do this whole Paris versus Lisbon thing and so on.
There's no comparison. France is a lot better, and the numbers are much bigger, and it's a much bigger country. So
okay, disclaimer: we just got a place actually in Portugal, so everything's working. But I think one of the things that really needs to happen if we really care about where this ecosystem is going to go is, of course, care about local development, but we really need to start thinking European in terms of where we actually want to be long term and the kind of mobility and values that we want to see across the different member states.
And Ricardo, by 2025, do you want to be the next Silicon Valley?
I see a lot. I mean, I think the thing that works more and more is if we collaborate a lot more. I see a lot more synergies between corporates collaborating. You're being told to leave, right? 2 minutes. Corporates collaborating, accelerators collaborating, incubators, everyone in the ecosystem, but between European countries. That's also something that I feel is missing a lot. I mean, there's still some, but we could do a lot more. Between the countries, learning experiences. Of course, the culture is different. Of course, there's different aspects inside each country, but this collaboration is super important.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to 2025 then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.